Or about a month before I got here was we got a hold of his letters, you know, so for the past couple of years I've been trying to learn more about Hedley. And about a month ago I got a hold of his letters, and it really filled in some details that we just never knew, you know, which I'll explain. And in one of the letters Hedley wrote home in late spring, one of the last letters he wrote, he wanted some good old maple candy. So he never got any. So I thought what I'd do is we'd share some maple candy on his behalf. So I'll pass those around if you want some maple to suck on, you know, as a... Pardon?
Some good York County.
That's right. Actually, just from Dumfries. So this would just be up where he was from, you know, just from the farm he was from. Showing some pictures as well of what he looked like. This is Hedley as well. Let's pass it around. Good looking guy. So before her death in the winter of 2014, my grandmother always spoke of the need for someone to visit Hedley. So it had been a great privilege to be here 4 years ago, to meet him. And it's an honor to be here again today, only this time to share what I've learned and what happened to him in the early morning of July 5th, 1944, when the Halifax heavy bomber he was in crashed east of Falaise. What I've learned about Hedley is that his story in part speaks to the humanity of our friends here in France. Civilians willing to put their own lives on the line so that Canadian soldiers were given proper care. And to use the words of Jean Lossier, who witnessed Hedley's death, so that parents might experience great consolation in knowing that their son went to his last resting place, surrounded with sympathy and escorted by the prayers of friends. We can draw anything away from Hedley's death. It is that although the Second World War unleashed a period of horrific suffering and pain to millions, there were still gestures of great morality that reinforced common bonds, that ethics mattered, that resisting oppression mattered. Ensuring that we also learn about the thousands of French civilians here who we've met, right, as well, who put their lives on the line so that people like my great uncle received a proper burial, still matters today. As well, standing here, it's difficult to neglect sharing that while Hedley and my grandfather were fighting their way into Western Europe and Italy in 1944, my Polish grandparents were fighting for their own survival, trying to get out of Eastern Europe. So these two parallel narratives are hard to ignore for me, especially being here in this place. By all accounts, the information I've found researching Hedley's service over the past 4 years is new knowledge to our family. The only person in the family who ever kept letters, correspondence, and personal items of Hedley was his sister Mary. She didn't know at the time when she was holding on to them how invaluable these would be in helping piece together a narrative of what happened to him and what Hedley was feeling in 1944. In talking with families still living, the only recollections they have of Hedley are memories of the day when news came of his death. The night they heard he was missing, the kids in Prince William were all about in the neighborhood when a big car came to the house and a man spoke to his dad in the yard. Over time, knowledge passed on between family members spoke about Hedley having served in the Air Force and that he had died somewhere in France when his parachute failed to open. But apart from this, very little was ever talked about or shared. And this was typical in my mother's home as well. When my grandfather was also serving in Italy with the 8th Hussars. And he left most things unspoken and unmentioned. So for Hedley, born in a small farming community outside Fredericton in June of 1922, his early life was dominated by experiences working on the family farm, hunting, fishing, attending community churches and dances, going to school in Prince William and Keswick Ridge. These farming communities along the St. John River Valley, traditional territories of the Wolastoqiyik, were colonized lands that had been passed down generation after generation from predominantly white loyalist families who had come from New England in the late 18th century. The Brewer family were Dutch loyalist settlers, and so the sentiment of working the land, living a simple life, getting a good education formed the foundation of who Hedley was. Apart from his parents, Hedley had a relatively large family with 3 brothers and 4 sisters. His older brother Otis had died as a teenager in 1933. So in 1939, Hedley graduated from Keswick Ridge Superior High School and immediately went to work for his father on the family farm before moving to Ontario with a friend named Eddie Hood. While in Ontario, he found work as a steel inspector. Once he turned 21, Hedley returned home and enlisted in Moncton on June 4th, 1942, shortly after his older brother, my grandfather, had enlisted with the 8th Hussars in Sussex. The day he enlisted also happened to be his birthday. Because of his demeanor, his relative education, his size, standing only at about 5 feet 6 inches tall, made him a natural with the Royal Canadian Air Force. For much of 1942 and 43, he divided his pilot officer training between bases in Lachine, Quebec, and Guelph, Ontario, and Halifax and Debert in Nova Scotia. He earned his wire operator air gunner badge on May 31st, 1943, and according to his flying logbook, something that again I just got, he trained with the No. 4 Bomber Reconnaissance Squadron in Canada before going overseas to England to continue training. Now, according to the RCAF's 6th-year official history, the winter of 43-44 brought along increased efforts by Bomber Command to hit strategic sites in Germany with the intention to erode production capacity, disrupt lines of transport, inflict casualties, and attempt to show on some level that the Allies were gaining the upper hand in the air war. According to his flight logbook, Hedley spent much of January to April of 1944 involved in missions designed to do the same in France and Belgium, where heavy bombers were used in a long series of night raids against rail line communications and Nazi defenses. When finding the time, Hedley wrote home often. Letters written in February relay that he and his brother were in close contact, despite Murray being in Italy and Hedley being in England. Dear Mom, it's been over a week now since I've had a chance to get a letter off to you, so here it goes while I have the time. I got a letter from Murray yesterday. He seems to be doing okay, and he gives the Air Force a lot of credit for their work down there in Italy. We had from yesterday noon until today noon off, so we went to town about 7 miles from here. My navigator and I stayed at a hotel all night. Boy, it was sure nice to get back in a good bed again. Mattress was about a foot thick. My bed was warmed before I got in it. Had a hot water made of porcelain in it. Well, Mom, there isn't much I can write about, but I sure would like to write much more someday. I'll be able to tell you all about the things we're doing. Your loving son, Hedley. In March, Hedley wrote home thanking everyone for parcels he had received and inquired if family had started making maple syrup, expressing that he wanted to get some good maple candy. By April, he had written to his brother Elton about the usual things the brothers talked about back home. He said, I suppose you're resting up before the usual big Easter dance not far away now. Hope you have a grand time. I might go to a dance tonight. Generally have a good time. And easy as old heck to grab onto a girl. Biggest trouble is getting rid of them. Boy, wouldn't you like that. By late April, Hedley's light-hearted correspondences began to express appreciation that Elton had actually stayed home on the farm. And there was a certain tone of uneasiness in writing to his mom. I'm certainly glad that Elton is level-headed enough to stay where he is, as he can take it from me. I'd give a lot if I'd never got myself swept up in things. Now, I can't say that I'm scared. No, I'm not scared. But believe me, I'm going to breathe a whole lot easier when it's all over. Don't you and Dad worry about Murray and I. We'll be home by Christmas. By this time, Hedley was officially assigned to number 433 Squadron, known as the Porcupine Squadron. According to his flying logbook, through much of May and June, he and his crew were heavily involved in bombing operations throughout France in the areas of Caen and Falaise, targeting Nazi communication and transport routes, airfields, supply depots. Once the D-Day battles began, Hedley's D-Day was June 5th, when the Handley Page Halifax bomber he was flying in were involved in early morning operations at Holgate, just east of Sword Beach, followed by the same on June 6th, just west of Falaise. According to his flying logbook, June 10th, 12th, and 14th found Hedley and his crew again providing bomber support in the early morning hours, this time near Saint-Cyr, Arras, and Cambrai, attempting to diminish German counterattacks by delaying the movement of their forces. By early July, the Porcupine Squadron continued its strategic air support of Allied infantry, delivering good prangs in and around Caen, where we just were, Falaise, and he was doing cross-country missions near the Belgian border in places such as Metz. This suggests that Bomber Command was becoming increasingly confident in their air superiority during the months following D-Day. Like any other sortie, Hedley and his crew went out again the early morning hours of Wednesday, July 5th, this time delivering a package to the area of Montreux-la-Cambre, just east of Falaise. However, this time their plane never returned, and Hedley would be officially listed as missing. It'd be well over a year before family received any word regarding what had happened, with the chief of the air staff admitting in a letter to Hedley's father, indicating they'd be moving forward with the presumption of death. By December, a report submitted by the Missing Research and Inquiry Unit of the Royal Air Force investigating the crash site found evidence suggesting that Hedley was the only member of the crew to not survive the plane crash. In a letter written to the Canadian government, a French civilian named Jean Lerossier shared information about their exodus from Caen in early July, and also revealed what had happened the morning of July 5th in the area near the crash site. It was while in this village that we witnessed a plane crash. One night when some aircrafts were going by, a German fighter shot at some of the planes in the group. We immediately saw a flame falling and nothing more in the night. In the morning, a farmer living nearby told us that he had just found in his field the body of a flyer whose parachute hadn't opened. From the few papers on him, this flyer was a Canadian by the name of Brewer. He was very young. The Germans were still occupying the village at the time. However, the village authorities and civilian population agreed to not disclose us to the Germans, and they wanted to have a burial as suitable as they could in the circumstances. My husband and I attended, and each home in the village was represented. Everyone brought flowers. And a French flag covered his coffin in the church. The mayor offered a few words at the gravesite. He couldn't talk long as they feared the arrival of the Germans. The parents of this young man may, however, be comforted in knowing that their son was carried to his last resting place by sympathetic hands. The mayor kept the papers, hoping to be able to send news after the liberation. I don't know whether he's been able to do so. Wars only bring unhappiness. There should be some way of eliminating them from the world. As to myself, I've suffered greatly from the war. I was left an orphan following the 1914-1918 war. And in 1940, I lost a young son who was only 4 months old when he died as a result of the first exodus in 1944. My home was destroyed as well. I hate war. After this letter was received, military authorities quickly followed up with witnesses in the area and learned in the spring of 1945, American units had come across Hedley's grave in Montreux-le-Camp. They had exhumed his body and then handed his remains over to authorities with the Imperial War Graves Commission. Although government letters confirmed this was not typical practice, they were able to eventually locate Hedley's remains here in Bretteville-sur-Laize Commonwealth Cemetery. Nearly 3 years after his disappearance, Hedley's parents finally received an official letter from the RCAF Chief of Staff dated April 8th, 1947, confirming his final resting place here, apologizing with deepest sympathies for having had to wait so long. Over the past few years, I've attempted to contact and locate families in that village who found Hedley. Civilians who showed a care and respect that was not asked of them. I haven't been successful yet, but I still hold out hope that our family will one day be able to meet family members of those responsible for finding him, so that we can properly thank them, perhaps over a glass of wine, and then share a little bit about who he was and how what they did still has meaning to us, even though time has passed. I still hold out hope that will happen. Hedley was 23 years old at the time of his death.